course.
Drinking with Lincoln. Hey, folks, it's Rick. We are live tonight. Can you believe it? Stuart and I are in the same physical location. We're in a secret, undisclosed location in the great state of Florida. And we are joined, of course, tonight by our comrade Joe, as always, and by Tara McGowan of Courier News. Tara, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. We really appreciate seeing you with us, and happy to and excited to talk about your project and to cover a little bit of the news of the day.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what Courier Newsroom is doing, where you guys have expanded to. I know it's a growing enterprise, and how it fits in the landscape of journalism today, especially when our politics and our media has become so siloed into some very niche-y kind of partisan funnels.
Yeah, absolutely. So I founded Courier Newsroom in 2019. We are a pro-democracy local news network. We also have national channels and content products, but we really started out focused on building newsrooms that would meet people who don't actually engage with legacy or traditional media, where they are online, mostly on social media and through email newsletters. We are now in 10 states. We're about to launch our 11th. We are in, I'll let the audience decide why we're in the states we're in, but we are currently in Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Michigan, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wisconsin. And we will be launching Texas very soon in Dallas-Fort Worth, and then we'll be expanding across the great state of Texas over the next year or so. And really, I started my career in journalism many years ago. I made a pivot into politics after covering politics as a journalist at 60 Minutes. And then I made a return back to news because of the state of media and how quickly it was changing and the disruption in media and the business models that sustain journalism and media in America, and also how the influence of right-wing media in particular was influencing our politics and threatening our rights and freedoms and democracy. And I felt that Democrats were asleep at the wheel a little bit. They were relying way too much.
Not a little bit. Not a little bit. Sorry.
There's bright spots and everything, right? But yeah, I was really frustrated. I worked in Democratic and progressive politics for a long time, about a dozen years, and I ran some of the largest digital advertising programs on the left. I ran $100 million super PAC, i.e. effort against Donald Trump in 2020 that I'm incredibly proud of. But in all that work I was doing, I was very frustrated by a number of aspects of the playbook, as it were. And one of them was that Democrats were relying entirely on paid one-way advertising to communicate their message in a media environment where mainstream legacy media was in a defensive posture against right-wing media's attacks that they were too liberal and had a liberal bias. And so they decided to lift up the lies of the right, and especially Trump, as equivalent to facts, and really blurred the lines for people. And I think they played an enormous role. I think they're very culpable, legacy media institutions, in Trump's rise and MAGA's rise in this country. And Democrats were focused on their own branded advertising with billions of dollars spent to be able to compete with that. And you could do it in a one-off election, but it wasn't sustainable. And then another element that I was really frustrated with was the overinvestment and focus on quote unquote swing voters who tend to be older and whiter in the battleground states, who change their vote and who used to determine elections with very thin margins in the battleground states. And they were focusing too much money and resources at this audience at the expense of focusing on how to expand the voting electorate, who actually aligned with their values and their positions on issues that impact people's lives, like the economy and healthcare and reproductive freedom and education and climate change. And so I started Courier to be able to focus on people who don't actually vote very often, in elections in this country, but who do share popular positions on these issues. They're actually not progressive, in my opinion. They're popular. Over 60-70% of Americans support increased gun control, reproductive access and freedom, action on climate change. And so I wanted to create a news organization that actually focused on delivering good factual information and news to this population that was left behind by legacy media and only being reached by political ads that are not super effective by Democrats. So that was the origin of Courier.
Nice.
And can you sort of explain what is different about Courier, sort of the business model of it? How really it works?
Yeah, so I talk about the kind of three key ways that we are really different than any traditional news organization in the country. And the first is that we do have a very specific audience that is underreached now, increasingly underreached by traditional media. And when I say traditional media, I mean print newspapers, I mean digital local news where it exists in this country, I mean radio, I mean broadcast television. And so our audience that we focus on, which happens to be most Americans today, get their information for free by scrolling social media and messaging apps and talking to their friends and neighbors. They don't watch cable news. We know those rates are declining rapidly. They don't pay through paywalls, which is where most local and national good factual reporting is trapped today. And so they're getting information, but they're getting it for free. It's very porous, right? And it's very algorithm driven. And so we focus intentionally on how do we reach and engage these people where they are. So that leads to the second way that we're different, which is where they are, which our distribution is entirely focused on free email newsletters in our states that we're in, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And so our journalists most of them are traditionally print journalists that we have trained to become social media influencers, to become the trusted faces and voices of explainer videos on TikTok and Instagram Reels, who build relationships with our audiences over time and break down important news and information. And then the third way that we're different is that we actually measure the impact. And something as a former journalist I was very frustrated about was that success or impact of your reporting was often measured by the respect of your peers or very kind of elite awards, as opposed to actually understanding if you are genuinely achieving your mission of informing the public and educating the public. And so we run experiments, and we know that we actually increase voter participation in elections, not for specific candidates, but just actually civic engagement among audiences that don't engage.
It's interesting that that the civic engagement question is really something that, as we talk about where the country is going, this growing concern of a disconnect between civic life and American voters is just so pertinent and it's so pressing that I think that what you're doing has a lot of merit, because there aren't a lot of other structural things that we're going to be able to just pull off the shelf, or there's not a lot of ways to change the format of social media platforms to get them out of an algorithmic sort that gets back to compelling news coverage. So I think that's an interesting way that addresses I think a pretty big civic problem.
It is. And I think one of the questions that begs for all of us to ask, Rick, is what is news today? Right? We need to abandon conventional wisdom and understanding of these things. The way that people get information is so dramatically different today. The way all of us get information, whether we're educated, work in politics, right? All of us here, right? The four of us are super engaged. We're probably consuming more information than even some of the most informed Americans, right? And yet, I am also a passive news consumer. I love that Axios tells me how many minutes it's going to take me to scroll their newsletter, and I want to beat it. I care about what things are going to be efficient and how much information I get in the least amount of time. And I don't think that's abnormal. And for people who are not very engaged, they're not even thinking about this. And so they're just taking in what comes at them. And what comes at them is often a lot of bullshit and a lot of disinformation and a lot of propaganda. And it really is, it all comes out of Steve Bannon's quote, flood the zone. The amount of volume and frequency of one message is going to be the message that wins. And if you're not competing in the same spaces, if you're not providing access to free, digestible information that people can just understand really quickly when they're skimming, you're going to lose any narrative war that there is. And I think that we've gotten a little bit better at competing, but it's a tall task. And our media institutions are not at all prepared or even I think awake enough to how things have changed to really adapt.
Joe, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say the right's been actively building these networks for decades, and modernizing them and getting into new platforms and pushing it constantly, and also gets repeat. And the progressive side, Democrats tend to like, oh, we explained that one time in a big speech or in a big, we had a whole week on that, and then it goes, and it still have not gotten that. No, it takes repetition of the truth to knock down the crap that they're feeding every single day. So the question I had is, have you sensed, or how, as X became what it's becoming, do you feel throttled? I mean, are you dependent at all on social media? How does that work for you in terms of the way they've, again, like we just had Sinclair by the Baltimore Sun. So you see all these sort of right of center, or even crazier on the right, buying up these media outlets, or like Twitter with Elon. How's that impacting you, though, in terms of getting your message out, or is it because of that local bottom up thing that you think that you're penetrating it bigger than from the bottom up instead of having to fight it from the top down?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So our local newsrooms, like I mentioned, are really focused on people that aren't super engaged. So they're mostly not on X. I will never, it's be a struggle for me to call it X. It's Twitter. It's Twitter forever.
It's always going to be Twitter. I'm never going to say the other word. I will die for it.
We didn't X something. We tweeted something. Like it's still Twitter.com. I'm sorry. It's just, but the majority, like I'm in the business of trying to get people to vote and vote in line with their values and participate and keep a fucking democracy around, excuse my language. And so like, that means you've got to figure out where the people are that actually move the needle today. And since 2016, when Democrats have won, it isn't because they've won. It's because Republicans have lost, because their extremism has overstepped in a big way. I think that's a huge problem the Democratic Party is going to have to deal with after this election. God willing, we win. That is a problem that's going to have to be dealt with, because it's not that they actually stand for something. It's that we're standing against enormous, egregious extremism and authoritarianism. And the people that have made the difference are the ones who don't actually vote normally. Like a huge segment of our audience at Courier voted for the very first time in their lives, no matter what their age, in a midterm election in 2018 or 2022. These are not people that were engaged before. They are engaged because their rights and freedoms are being taken away. Right. And so like, this is not hope and change. This is like, oh shit. This affects me personally. This isn't about an ideology. This isn't about a vision of the future. And so while we have to leverage that, right, like we also have to be really cognizant of the fact that like there is going to be a massive vacuum of what the vision for the future is, regardless if it wins the next election. And so to your point about X, like our audience is not there. So, but what that has impacted, right, is those of us who are engaged in this work, who do this work every day, who are understanding that models like Twitter that were wildly effective at influencing the influencers, right? Influencing the talkers, influencing the people who have real power and resources or audience reach, who are spending time on the platform. We don't have a good sense anymore. We don't have any sense anymore.
No.
Of what's
it's
happening.
Opaque. It's become opaque. So, Tara, one of the questions I wanted to ask you tonight, we talk a lot about how the traditional media is unready and is sort of failing, and it's really normalized Trump in a lot of ways. What I wanted to talk to you about was, we saw NBC last week name Ronna McDaniel, one of the worst and most egregious Trump enablers and election deniers in the entire American political system, and it's a long damn list. We saw them name her as a contributor to the network, $300,000 a year, and we saw them reverse that decision today after a almost unprecedented political firestorm sweeping over. Um, is this kind of own goal the kind of thing that's just diminish the media? I mean, look, even though they've made the right decision now, the best way would have been to never make the initial appointment of Miguel. What do you think was driving them? What do you think the results of this is going to be in the end?
It's there is something sweet in the moment of them canceling her as a contributor to the network, in the sense that it was so wildly out of touch and idiotic for no one on the team that made that decision to foresee the backlash that would come from within their own company and
Right.
their own bench of talent. Because I know journalists real well, and I used to be one, and I manage a lot of them. And there is nothing but an enormous adherence to integrity for good journalists about the adherence to facts and truth and being able to maintain and cultivate respect and trust among their audience.
Right.
And what they did by deciding to hire her as a contributor was essentially say that we don't give a shit about any of you or about these morals or these ethics or standards you care about. And so the writing was on the wall. I mean, and that's why also the bench of talent was so able and willing to come out so forcefully. And what an unbelievably just idiotic decision by them, and an incredibly expensive one at that, and preventable. And so I
If you want
actually,
to throw $300,000 on a bonfire, that was a way to do it.
Yeah. No, as somebody who's been sat down by a network, she's going to collect her dough. So it's
look, I hesitate
Right.
to say this because I really worry about the state of our democracy and our political parties in this country right now. But like, things actually have to reach an unbelievable breaking point in order for new models to be created and scaled. And we are watching the death of traditional media and the people that have led it who are out of touch. I think we really are. And these are the moments where you see it very, very, very clearly. We saw it with CNN, with the try to glow up that Chris was trying to put forward after Zucker's tenure there. Like, we're going to keep seeing it until they get the memo and they internalize it and they bring fresh talent on that understands where media is and where it's going, not where it was and where it's never going back.
So, Tara, let me ask you a question. Can you take us through, like, how is your newsroom organized? How is it that you're doing it differently, and sort of what are your editorial? How are you? Yeah, I mean, and just kind of, you're reinventing the newsroom. Can you kind of just describe us what that's like?
Yeah.
What it is?
You know what? I like to say that we're going back to where news started in this country, which was incredibly ideological and transparent
Yes.
about where they stood, because that is the origins of the Washington Post and the New York Times in this country. And so we are in a crisis moment, and a crisis moment requires very urgent, immediate solutions. And I think that we have created one at Courier that I wish more people would copy, which is really focused on what are the stakes, not the horse races. What are the audiences that need information that aren't getting it, because we have a disinformation economy and information ecosystem that has been entirely poisoned by unregulated big tech that now has more control and power than the government or independent media in this country. And so what we've built at Courier is I value, and our team values, transparency over objectivity. I worked at 60 Minutes. I worked in traditional media. I worked at CBS News. Objectivity has always been a fallacy. Every news organization in this country makes decisions about what to cover, how to cover it, and how often to cover it. And anyone who claims different is full of shit. And I believe that the American people are incredibly smart, and they have incredibly strong instincts about good versus evil and what's true and what's not. And I think that the reason that trust in media in this country is at an unprecedented historic low is because people never believed that people were objective or media was objective. And so to hear that is a slap in the face. To hear that people stand for certain things, whether they agree with them or not, that can cultivate trust. I think that's why there's movement away from brands and legacy news organizations into influencers, people that they feel like they know, they've seen part of their lives, their houses, their children, they've seen them in their daily lives. That's the stuff that cultivates trust. So at Courier, we really emphasize that. How do you build trust with an audience? And it comes from a human level, being honest about who you are, what you stand for, why you stand for it, and standing in your literal living room or walking down the street while you're explaining something that happened to people in a way that is conversational, not jargon or wonky or insider baseball feeling. And I think that the media in this country has really lost touch with the vast majority of Americans. And I think that's something that just happens. They're talking to their peers, they're reporting for their peers, and they're leaving everyone else behind. And so there's a vacuum that's being filled by bad actors that needs to be filled by smart models like ours that actually respects our audience. Like, we genuinely respect our audience. Our reporters come from the communities that we serve. They talk to them on the platforms where they are in a way that they would talk to them at the coffee shop. And that's what earns their trust. And so when it comes to the editorial firewall, because I'm not trying to pivot away from your question, Stuart. I have two national editors, a national political editor, Pat Reinhardt, who's wonderful. He founded Iowa Starting Line, which we acquired in 2021. He manages and coaches all of our in-state political reporters. They are the faces and voices of their political reporting on TikTok and Instagram and in their articles. And Kim Lawson, who's been with us almost from the very beginning, is our national community editor. And she manages all of our in-state community editors who run our weekly free newsletters that have been proven to be incredibly persuasive to our audiences who open them. We have a 47% average open rate. Our audiences love the products that we give them because they're not getting anything like it at the local level.
And so you go into a market, how do you build that audience for how do they know the Courier exists? How does this, you have some model that's working here that is just fascinating. How is that? Like, you go into Texas, how are they going to know that you're there?
Yeah. So we no longer live in the world where you can build it and they come, where it's about the quality of your content or your product. Those days are over. There is enormous saturation and competition in elite media, right? Media by and for elite, small, educated, wealthy populations. Our audience does not have a lot of good free media or content available to them. So there's actually a massive market opportunity, by the way, that I think that we have capitalized on as we've grown. And we have invested, like, this is something that I think is controversial, that I don't believe is controversial. But in my 12 years working in politics and running digital advertising programs, working in campaigns, you guys all know this well, you have to be insanely efficient with your time and your money, the two scarce resources you have to get your information out to the right people to deliver the outcomes that you want. So you learn to be surgical. You learn to be targeted. When you work in digital, like I have for 15 years, you really understand how to leverage these platforms and targeted advertising. I brought that into a news organization. And so we have spent over $6 million to boost our local lifestyle and traditional, like, what you want to know about your community news content on platforms like Meta and Google Search, to a target audience of people who do not engage politically very often. They want that information. We offer them a free sign up for a free newsletter when they click on an article they want to read about the 10 best hiking trails or places to go with their kids on the weekend in their community. They sign up. We have an over 85% retention rate because they want free information. That's how we have built our newsletter audience. For social, it's all organic. Don't pay for followers. They just follow us because the content reaches them on the algorithm, because we're giving them information they're not getting otherwise.
Tara, let me ask you a question about how you unify your sort of branding across different influencer platforms on TikTok and Insta, because you've got different reporters. I'm curious, like, how does that fit? Are they using a similar set of descriptors or backgrounds, or or profiles. I'm just curious about that because that's obviously an area that's driving a tremendous amount of traffic and engagement these days. And especially if you're under 35, you're getting your news likely off of TikTok.
That's right. This is one of the coolest parts about Courier and one of the funnest parts of my job. Like, I really built something that I wanted to exist. I didn't feel like I was ever able to find good local news or information or reporting in the battleground states doing all the work that I did. It's certainly a need, but the coolest part is that our teams, they all do their own thing, but then they all get together every week. We're a fully remote organization. We have just under 100 employees, and all of our political reporters are connecting every single day. All of our community editors are. And so they're each trying different things and letting their colleagues know, their peers know what's working. The other ones try it, and then it scales. And so it all looks different. It all looks different. And so, like, you could go to Copper Courier on TikTok and see Cam, our political reporter and correspondent there, who is a print reporter for years. He's been with us since the beginning, and he just won Best TikToker in the Phoenix Magazine Best of Awards. No one on our team submitted him, but all of his explainer videos about what's happening in their incredibly extremist Republican state legislature go viral. And so people have seen him and they know his face and they know his voice. And then you could go to the Gander, our Michigan newsroom, and Ronna, one of our correspondents there, her reporting looks totally different, but she's built a really strong following. So we let them do their thing. They know best. They learn as they go. Like, this is the other thing is, like, we're very risk inclined. You have to be today. No one has an idea of what works or what doesn't until they try things. And we really cultivated an amazing culture for our reporters. And, they tend to stay younger and our social media correspondents, but like, they drive. And I have to give credit. I learned that from being on the Obama campaign in 2012. They empowered all of us young people to do what we knew and what we wanted to try, and they didn't get in our way. And I think that is the problem with legacy media and legacy political parties and committees and campaigns, is that they're not letting the people that actually understand where media and information is today leading the way. And that's something we really pride ourselves on.
Fascinating. Well, Tara, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the strategy session. We really appreciate your time. Wish you all the best with Courier, and I think it is an amazing model, and look forward to seeing you guys expand more thoroughly throughout the country. And
it's a huge accomplishment.
Really is an amazing
it's great.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you guys so much. I am such a fan of everything you do and grateful for everything you all do for our democracy. And folks can follow us at Courier Newsroom, Instagram, Twitter.
That was my next question. You know that you're in.
Sign up. If you live in or you have friends or neighbors in any of our states, please share the content, share the brands with folks so the word gets out. It's so important. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
again, Tara. Well, folks, this wraps up another episode of the Strategy Session. I want to encourage everybody here to listen to That Trippy Show, the Joe Trippy's excellent podcast, who you've had some killer guests lately, Joe, amazing guests. You can also tune into my podcast, The Enemies List, and sign up for Resolute Square. And every Tuesday, you'll see us here doing our thing on the Strategy Session and maybe some new shows soon. We'll see. Anyway, thanks, everybody. Have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, all. Take care.